A question that I ask all of the guests to just kind of warm them up to the process and talking in front of the microphone is, if you had one novel that you could suggest everyone should read, what is it and why?
Good question. 100 Years of Solitude would be one that I've suggested many times, but it's not an easy read, so perhaps not that. What else? Oh, pregnant pause. That everybody should read? That's honestly, genuinely difficult question. I mean, I've read an awful lot of books, and as a consequence, each one has its own thing to say. It would be easy to just pick out Blythe. I think probably something like Of Mice and Men, East of Eden, something of that nature. I think they are transcendent books that anybody and everybody will get something from, and probably depict the human tale in all its facets more extraordinarily clearly than any other books. John Steinbeck was a legend, basically. So yeah, anything by John Steinbeck.
I think it's interesting that you went there because, so I was really surprised because the first time I asked this question, I got his Dark Materials, which Angus suggested.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a really zag for Angus. I thought, he'd go, I don't know, Lenin's autobiography or fucking some of the other random alternative or regular history books that he's read. Uncle Stuart came back with Harry Potter.
Yeah, no.
For a fascinating. But the reason why was something that I'm sure you'll connect to because of who you live with, which is he said these are great books, not per se because they are moving pieces of literature that will fundamentally change the way you perceive the world, so much as they are just easy entertainment.
Perhaps, but I think whilst they both have merits and they are books that I enjoy and revere in many respects, they're gateway books. They're books to get you reading, not books to be read. Oh. And I think if you're going to declare a novel or a book of any description, if you're going to declare a novel or any book, then that should be read literally universally. Unless you're an evangelical Christian or a Muslim, then obviously it would be the Bible or the Quran. But really?
Or the Torah, or
whatever.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
But it needs to be something really quite something. I mean,
substance.
Yeah, substance, impact, import. We've discussed in the past, obviously, the benefit. The greatness of the magic surrealism of 100 Years in Solitude. But it doesn't translate to everybody. You have to have an open mind to accept that nonsensical part. And similarly, if a book is going to be universally interesting and impactful, it has to have a universal story. And I think something like John Steinbeck, something, I'm reluctant to say the Charles Dickens of the world because everybody's got a hackneyed view of them because of damned television dramas. But
so many of them.
Exactly. But, God knows everybody waxes on about Jane Austen and so on and so forth. Frankly, Yawnville, if I'm honest.
I would agree with that, and I would say, especially having performed a lot of Great Expectations and akin, the problem with Dickens especially is that it's like Harry Potter. It's a fantastic way to get into acting and get into watching theatre and get into watching these visual representations of novella and human stories, but it doesn't really scratch beyond that surface.
No.
And I think it's interesting because it's like anything really. If you want to get good at push-ups, you have to start somewhere. If you want to become an athlete, there has to be that initial block.
But going back to the original premise, I think if it's a book that you would recommend to anyone, I think if frankly, you could start absolutely at the beginning and say The Cat in the Hat, or you could say, it depends what your audience is. I mean, I think the thing about Dickens is, Dickens is a really, really good thing to get into if you have, and it translates well to telly because it is episodic. It was a weekly episode. That's how they were released.
Right?
In the paper. Not all of them, but most of them were. And as a consequence, they have that chapter by chapter, open, action, resolve the action, conclusion, end type passage, which obviously makes for easy
consumption.
And television.
And I think we've spoken about this before, because personally I really, really grapple and gripe with the hero's journey and this kind of cyclical structure of equilibrium shift from start of this show to climax to narratively and then the end and resolution. But I mean, I'm thinking more from a Vonnegut perspective, right?
Oh, right, that's taking it a bit.
So
No, there's a book.
Yeah.
Slaughterhouse 5. I mean, it's not for everybody, but I defy anybody. Actually, on that, a book that I think everybody should read is Catch-22.
Okay, explain.
Joseph
Elaborate.
Heller's book. Well, Joseph Heller's book, Catch-22, is basically, I don't know, you haven't read it, have you?
No.
Well, then, there you are. This is my proper recommendation to you. So Catch-22 is a character-driven novel based in the Second World War in Malta, I think, where you've got a number of really peaky, very hyperly described characters with extreme personal characteristics, who are all part of the US Bomber Command in the Second World War, and who have all, in the main, had way too much war experience, way too many, and at its essence, hence the Catch-22, is this dilemma. That is, Captain Yossarian, the pilot, wants to stop flying.
Mm-hmm.
In order to stop flying, he either has to get killed,
Which doesn't want to.
gravely injured, or be declared insane.
But you can't declare yourself insane.
You can't declare yourself insane, so it would be, if he, the Catch-22 basically is, for him, he would have to be insane to fly more missions, but he cannot be insane because he knows that you'd have to be insane to fly. It's a kind of riff on that. So whatever he does, whichever way he presents this insurmountable problem, there is no end game. He is in a loop. So the more he does, the more he contradicts his circumstance, or and it's an endless loop. Hence the Catch-22. Whatever decision you make, you are damned
And
by.
popularising expression.
And it created the expression, but more importantly, it's a book of massive. It's just an enormous book, and it's an extraordinary thing. I mean, Joseph Heller, I don't think he ever wrote anything remotely like it again, but it is one of those books that absolutely live with you forever. So that's the first question. What do you tend to follow up after the first question?
I mean, this is on the vein of the Larry King. I don't usually pre-prepare the questions.
No.
I have some idea of what I want the conversation to go in and what I want to ask you about, but I kind of make them up on the fly. I would say, following up from the Catch-22, I was having this discussion with another person recently, which is surrounding yourself with massive, eccentric characters, right? I would describe myself as relatively lucky because I've known a lot of big characters, or rather belong to a family full of them, hence why you're on the pod. How would you say that can shape a person? And what are the benefits of surrounding yourself with eccentric people?
I'm not sure eccentric's the word I would use to describe it. So I suppose if I were to go through the sort of key phases of my life, I grew up relatively isolated with relatively few people, certainly in primary school, and the probably significant relationship with a big character would be with my cousin Foggy, who, despite being 5 or 6 years older than me, at least, 6 probably, we were exceptionally close, and he is literally he is of epic proportions as a character. And so we got used to being jocular, being, I hate the word banter, but, having an awful lot of...
There's a good rhetoric.
Yeah, a rapport, a kind of, the
chemistry.
The conversation flowed, yeah, absolutely. And it was highly communicable. Lots of chat, lots of antics, etc. I mean, as you grow older, into secondary school, etc., the sort of cast grows and changes. There was nothing terribly remarkable about that. I suppose then the next thing you get into military service, and you are surrounded, as I was, by extraordinarily potent, not always interesting,
But big.
Potent, impactful,
Oh, okay.
Characters. People who have an awful lot to say and nothing very much by way of saying it. Other people who rely on the stripes on their shoulders to, get any form of moral or circumstantial superiority. And then you've got people who were just bloody great characters. And so that, being on a ship for that length of time, 6, 7, 8, sometimes 9 months, lends itself to a tremendous amount of familiarity and big characters, and as a consequence, you have, I suppose, you learn to either enjoy or handle or deal with big behaviours. And but yeah.
It's interesting that you say that, because if you kind of, I suppose, were looking for a common thread and to track something, you would almost say that idea of intense closeness, not solitude so much as dependence on a small handful of people, relatively to the sample size of a population. On the island, you're relatively isolated from the rest of the world. You're seeing the same characters over and over again.
And relatively isolated from one another.
And relatively isolated from one another. And then again, in the military, when you're on a boat, I mean, you're on a fucking boat. There's only so many people on the boat when you get on the boat, and while they may come and go. I guess my point is how has that effect and that intense community shaped you as a character from maybe a less subconscious and more conscious level? And then how would you sell that to me? Would you say
No,
it's
I wouldn't
positive or
sell it to you.
negative?
Oh, well, I suppose, how has it affected me first? I think you build up a tremendous level of self-reliance, absolute ease and comfort in your own skin, no reliance on being stimulated or, reliant. Obviously, you're reliant on other people to a greater or less extent. But you have that core of self-sufficiency, individualism at its heart, because that's how you learn to live. Having said that, a tremendous appreciation for good crack, good company, stimulating conversation, never let an opportunity go without being fully exploited. Exploit it absolutely to its maximum. Because if you have, as I've had, times where those episodes are relatively few and far between, you do want to make them work for you. I mean, I've got innumerable stories of, nonsense and fun and all sorts, which are probably more heightened because they were sporadic, infrequent, and therefore maxed out.
And intense.
And intense, yeah. So would I sell it to you? I think, the qualities it can engender, I would sell. I think there's nothing more important than being certain and safe in your own skin, and particularly in your own mind. I think you need to be self-assured that the path that you're on is one of your choosing, and the people that you're engaging with are complementary and helpful rather than conflict and causing friction. So those things are useful. Choose your friends wisely. Acquaintances come and go. Friends don't, and they need to be nurtured. They need to be not neglected, and they need to know that you care as much about them as they apparently care about you. I think that's important. I don't think you need a multiplicity. I don't think you need to spread it thinly. As I said, there's a huge difference between good acquaintances well met
and
friendships.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think that, do you think it has taught you the value of the incremental little things to building a relationship? The small, daily, reoccurring elements that come to fostering something with a person, rather than maybe the big, vast, swathing moves? Because I think so often people have this Hollywood vision of, well, I'm going to do the big thing and that will justify all the small things that I've not been doing.
I think I've been summing this up in a relatively short sentence for years. The way you get to a point where you have relationships of that nature is, don't be a dick.
Right.
Simple as that. It's not a question of going, if I do this, the consequence of that, if I do that, consequence of this. It is where there are options to be an awkward, cussed pain in the arse, or to be either benign, non-engaged, or the opposite, helpful. Always choose the right hand. Don't be the dick. It's simple as that. Most people, the friendships are born out of infinitesimally small layers of infinitesimally non-important events, conversations, things. You know, it is an accumulation of jointly amassed knowledge and experience and care and consideration. And that isn't something you can point in a direction and go, today, that's what I'm going to do.
Okay.
It just isn't. That's how you can build a very broad and very positive and happy group of acquaintances. It's how you survive in a village, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, very few people in a village will become exceptionally close friends. And even those that appear quite close friends, you're there because of circumstance. You know, circumstance is always the way to start, but you're there because of circumstance. You happen to live in the same environment. Now, that may engender a relationship which actually grows into true friendship, or similarly, it'll grow into benign and happy coalescence and acquaintanceship.
Okay.
So,
I think that's good advice, because especially in the digital medium of instant gratification, I think I, as a young person, and obviously will not speak for others, but say that sometimes there is kind of a feeling that why isn't this gelling sooner? You know what I mean? This idea that if everything materially is so readily available to me, sometimes you kind of, that corrupts almost your sense of these things, like you say, are about fostering and are made up of the infinitesimally small things, not so much one big chemical reaction.
I think there's two issues there. Number one, you're young. You know, you're still getting used to even doing bits of this yet. You know, every environment you've been has been a controlled environment, be that school, now college. Outside of school and college, you still can't go to bars, and obviously lockdown, etc. But the point I'm trying to make there is there's a big difference between. So, for instance, as an adult, the one time you would want to short-circuit the system and get to instant, benign, close, comfortable friendship and more is when you are dating.
Right.
Okay. Now that is, as a consequence, a much more heightened. Everybody's focused on the end game, and so you literally slough off the bits that aren't necessarily important because you know you want to get either this consummated or this ditched.
It's a more basist thing.
Well, it's a much more intense, heady, because the end game is that much more significant. But if you get it right, in a relatively modest period of time, you go from two strangers to two absolutely best friends and bedfellows. And that is a very, very, very intense way of going about finding friends. Life friendship is more happenstance and circumstantial and...
in many ways more benign.
Oh, miles more. Well, gosh, I would hope so. I mean, you know, I'm still good friends with an awful lot of ex-girlfriends, but would I include them amongst my very closest friends? Probably not. They're,
which seems
you know,
fair.
Yeah, but the point I'm making for you is, at this stage in your life, because everything is so relatively young, new, fresh, and connections to be made daily, you've got no idea which ones are going to fall into place and which ones aren't. And so there is a sort of an odd sense of urgency when you're younger to build these connections, or a more, it's not urgency, that's not the right word. The right word would probably be you're far more open to making connections much more quickly, or it's terrifying and you become a bedroom dweller.
I see what you mean. So I think it's interesting because you're the oldest guest,
Oh.
officially. You are officially the oldest guest on the pod. No, well, I mean...
That's fine.
That's just process of it.
Well, you know, I obviously a lifetime of perspective.
But this is something that I discussed with the other much older guest in the form of Uncle Stu, which is this idea of the answers, right? And a point that he made that the listeners would know, because I'm doing these chronologically, is that something that he's really enjoyed about getting older is understanding that he doesn't know all of the answers, his parents never knew all the answers, and so much of it is about finding some of it. This is his perspective. Finding the answers as his kids get older as well. How would you contrast that?
I'm not sure I contrast it.
Or align with it?
Actually, you know, I'm not. I know this is going to sound a bit.
I have all the answers.
I haven't got all the answers. What I do have is a contentment in what I know, and I haven't got a sort of thrilling urge to become yet more insightful and even broader. Have a broader perspective. I mean, obviously, you know, a life well lived is an accumulation of knowledge and experience and so on and so forth, and that's great, and that will continue and so on. But I'm not a terribly reflective individual. Perhaps I'm more reflective in conversation like this than I would be individually sat quietly contemplating, you know, the four corners of a room. You know, I get I just get lost in my own thoughts at that point. Most of my responses to stimulus and questions of this nature are relatively instant. It's not I have dwelt upon this, and therefore my reasoned answer is based on an accumulation of knowledge which have culminated in insights that I don't know everything, but I do know this. Well, one of the big problems that most human beings have is they have no idea what they know, genuinely.
Yeah.
And even less, they have absolutely no idea what they don't know but should know.
Well, how could you know?
Exactly. And as a consequence, mistakes are made. It's very easy to reflect and say, A and B made C. That's what turned me from being that type of child into that type of adolescent into that type of adult. And that's fine. But unfortunately, there are billions of more, and mostly, frankly, it's a combination of choices made, choices avoided, and other people's input. That and how you respond to all that. So, it's not how my brain works. My brain doesn't work on the sense that I can reflect on having a greater sense of understanding now than I had when I was 19. I would bloody well hope so. I was a fool when I was 19. I'm only less of a fool now because I haven't got the energy to be as foolish as I was when I was 19.
It's really interesting that you say that, though, because I think, there's an idea that because ideas are old, they're worthy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because as a child, how could you not be beholden to the people who've done what you've done?
And this notion that your parents put some building blocks down and you build on top of it, it's crap. We reinvent every single wheel we ever get on. We're like bloody blind and deaf and completely stupid hamsters who actually blindly find themselves on a wheel, and then sometimes are cast off onto a different wheel, or sometimes they go under the wheel of the bus. The reality is, I know, but the reality is everything is made up. You might get good counsel. You might have good processes that you've either understood or copied. But no human being gets to become a sentient adult, an independent thinking, independent acting, sentient adult, without making those independent sentient thoughts and decisions themselves. Perhaps influenced or based on life-learned lessons, but mostly trial and error. Mostly their own, nobody gets up in the morning and go, oh, thank God my father, blah, 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 blah. Therefore, I'm going to encapsulate what he did 16 years ago. It's utter shite. Sorry. And as a consequence, I'm not. It's one of the things that I find about this sort of, I know who I am, and I know who my parents were, and I know what I've come from, and I know where I'm going. Very little of what I experienced as a young child, adolescent, or young adult
affects you now.
Translates into anything remotely applicable right now, apart from the large tropes, manners, consideration for others, an appreciation of the elderly, which God knows we elsewhere have completely forgotten, and tragically forgotten. But where I grew up, I was surrounded by the elderly.
Yeah.
Not reverence. If somebody is deserving of reverence, perhaps, but respect, total respect for the fact that they have lived a long life and therefore have seen many, many things and have therefore gotten up and made that decision in the morning to do whatever it is they're going to do. And that accumulation of life experiences deserves respect, not put in a box, shut up, keep quiet, you are, getting between me and the furniture. It's just not right. So that, I would absolutely. Okay. But most other things don't translate. No.
It's interesting because I think that listlessness, right, that lack of a sense of tangible cord to follow, like a twine, that scares a lot of people, I think. I think that idea that it's so stark of higher purpose. Do you see what I mean? I think that can be a really... So what would your advice...
I would say you would encapsulate it more, perhaps pertinently, by describing it as being risk. There's risk in not having... So I'm being a little bit disingenuous too, and not necessarily appreciative of those people for whom, life flows.
Yeah.
And I would include people who adhere to religion, people who adhere to orthodox behaviours, within communities or within sectors of society or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, I've always viewed every next day as being a step into the unknown, and I've never been scared of it. There have been plenty of moments of anxiety. There have been plenty of moments of doubt, serious, significant doubt. But the truth of the matter is, I think one of the qualities that has been imbued in me or I've developed is the fact that I can see a path for myself, which is absolutely undescribed. It's just forward, on. Going back to your Harry Potter, when Dumbledore says to Harry, "What do I do next?" Go on. And that's it. It's just going on. And taking that next step into the unknown, running a business, doing this, doing that. It's all, it's not the kind of thing that a risk-averse person would throw themselves into willingly. Circumstantially, they might have to, but they wouldn't really do it willingly. I love it. It's part of what drives me forward. I think I could no longer or no more sit in an orthodox 9-to-5 environment with a process and a channel and a path and everything writ large. God knows, the worst thing in life for me would be to become a project manager.
Do you know what we're describing this as? We have a name for this on the pod, because that exact thing has come up with you. We're calling it the Corrigan effect.
Okay, who's Corrigan?
Mark Corrigan from Peep Show.
Oh yeah, I'm not familiar.
Do you see what I mean? It's like that lifestyle.
Yeah.
I think is perhaps the inverse to what you're describing, and I do think it's interesting because doubling back on a point you made earlier. So, would you say that that's something innately about the way that you see the world, something that's been cultivated by your past precedents, or a combination of the two? What would you attribute that to?
What would
No
I
idea.
Not really. I think a wanton disregard for authority, an absolute loathing of being told what to do. All of these traits, as you can see, didn't sit well.
The irony of the military life.
I know, but it was interesting because that set boundaries of tolerance and acceptance and understanding, which, rather than it just being a blithe disregard and a blithe and undescribed intolerance, I actually know where my tolerance levels are because I've been forced to exceed them on many, many occasions in the past. And having left the military, the last thing I really wanted to do was get into an environment where, same suit or, same problems, different suit type situation. So that, I guess. I like being self-determining. I like being captain of my own ship. I like sharing life with a lot of people. I don't like sharing intimacy with a lot of people. And I certainly don't like sharing codependence or, on a lot of people. One of the reasons I don't have a large company or a large board of directors or a large group of advisors, like an awful lot of my competitors are, it's just, I don't want that input. I have no desire to sit in meetings and listen to other people tell me tell me their opinions of what I should be doing.
That self-determinism, though, does that? Because I think it's interesting because people, I think, would initially assume that it's a case of ego, but I don't think it is. I think it's instead a case of, like you say, authority and rules. And
no, I think I'm just an awkward arse, frankly.
No, but I mean, when you describe this self-deterministic, lifestyle, I would say would be the word. I think a lot of people would immediately jump to that has to be an ego. But just for the listeners at home, I don't really get that vibe. I don't get the strands of this is because of an inflated sense of self so much as just all there is that sense of movement, like you say.
Yeah, and the nice thing about what I do is I have the same code of clients that I've had for 20 years, but every day there's new people, every day there's new clients, every day there's new projects, every day there's new work. At its heart, it is broadly the same thing we do, but every iteration of that is colossally different. And I like that. And the more, if I were to grow the business by headcount more substantially, I would have to bring in what are called silos of operations. So very narrowly defined channels where a person or group of people are doing very, very similar work for very, very similar clients every single day.
Like HR.
And then I would be looking after the sum total. And you know what, I haven't
It's
got,
just not for you.
I can't be arsed. So that's the other thing. Acute laziness, which I would get found out about if I worked for somebody or with somebody else.
Mm. What drives that laziness?
Oh, complete and utter apathy. No, that's not fair.
I don't care about anything.
No, it's not that. I like a work-life balance that
Freedom.
is. I like freedom. I like a work-life balance that has. I like a job that pays me enough money to cock about and piss around a lot. And that could be sleeping in on the odd occasion, playing lots of golf with my pals, or going to the pub and not feeling terribly great the next morning and therefore not being that efficient at what I do. I have the capacity to be all of those things and still be professional and still earn good money and still satisfy my clients' needs, thank God, as demonstrated by the fact that they're still going after 20 odd years.
So what would you say to the people that say, but Kenny, how can you have it both ways?
You can have it both ways. In fact, I think some of the most successful people in the world have it absolutely every which way and twice on a Sunday, because I suppose there's two ways of looking at this. Money gives you time. Experience gives you efficiency. You put those two things together and you have a choice to make. You can either make absolute shit tons of money or use the plenty to give you the time. And it becomes, and I've gone for the latter. I want to earn enough money to have a very long and happy retirement, but I don't want to kill myself in the process of getting there. Through.
It's almost which sword do you fall on?
Yeah, sort of. I think, the other thing is, I have got a pretty limited work ethic. And I identified that. I get by on what I need to do, and I like to be engaged, but I don't like hard work.
Okay. Well, moving away from okay, Mark here, Steve wants to come in. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Hello.
I just called him Mark. It's all good.
Sorry.
Well, I think for the first time ever, the levels haven't been a problem. If anything, they've been too loud because he's actually so reverberating that it's peaking just all of the time. So I've turned the gain down a bit. It's weird. I've never had that with another guest. I don't know. I've got quite a loud voice, but yours shakes.
My shakes.
Well, you see on the graph there how it's going ping, 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 and then when on the top feed, which is mine, if I get really close, that's the only time it does what yours is doing all the time.
What I would say is I think you tend to find that older guests sometimes are slightly more confident and therefore they just tend to
project.
Slightly more
Yeah,
project
perhaps.
More.
Interesting.
And also I just think in terms of angle, I mean, you're sat up straight talking directly at you, whereas a few other people sometimes speak downwards and and they kind of hunch slightly. So it might just be that, it might just be that directionally picking up slightly louder volumes, but if in terms of balancing them, we'll just adjust the gain so you got it right. It looks like
Cool.
you've got it fairly evenly.
Yeah.
Cool. Everything going good?
I got the. I've really clocked the Zoom thing. So what I did was this time I had this microphone rigged up in between that speaker and my mouth.
Okay.
And it picked up both feeds perfectly.
Okay.
So I didn't even need to screen record it, which was bellissimo. Yeah.
Cool. I'll leave you to it then.
Cool. Cheers, Steve. All right. Mark, Steve is now leaving. There you go. Oh man, I've totally lost my train of thought.
Is he your
tutor? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very young.
Every time I've ever had a teacher, I mean, you and Mum, this seems to be the. So is it because?
It's a policeman thing,
Yeah.
There are certain people and professions you equate to experience at certain times in your life. So, for instance, I know what my teachers looked like. They looked much older than I did. Okay, and then suddenly they looked same age as I was, and then suddenly they look a whole shit ton younger. And it's little benchmarks, with none of which are particularly nice or flattering. There's little acknowledgements that you experience all the way through life, and the policeman is one, and the teacher is the other, and then the funeral director probably.
That's macabre. Okay, well, I feel like I want to move away from the success, but there's one thing I wanted to touch on. So, Mark here, new question. When we talk about this kind of meditative idea of presence, right? So I would say that you are somebody that strikes me as never really struggling with being out of the moment.
No.
I would say that I very frequently flit in between past, present, future, tomorrow, yada yada this, yada that. But I don't think I see that escapism in you.
No, I'm not prone to drifting away or disengaging. I think I take quite a lot of pleasure in being super aware of what's happening in that moment, pretty much all the time. I find my respite and recoveries by when on my own, listening to books, whatever, just having brain dead time. But most of the time, I'm either in company or engaged with things, be it work, be it whatever. I would say I'm acutely on it, sharply aware, and probably sometimes overly engaged.
Do you think that that's exhausting?
No, it's great
Sounds
fun.
exhausting.
No, not at all. I mean, because again, it goes back to what I said before. I have an awful lot of time off if I wish it.
Yeah.
I'm not, unlike you who, well, you're not a great example because you didn't come to college at all, but an ordinary
Someone who's beholden to the hours of a day.
is exactly right, and therefore the scrutiny that goes with it, etc. I don't suffer from that. So when I'm in the moment, a good example would be I'll go into a meeting which might last 2-3 hours. And will be exhausting, but I won't notice that it was exhausting until, sometime later on the drive home. But absolutely, whilst we're in there, acutely on it, synapses firing, communication flowing, loving every minute of it. Going to the pub, very rarely do I go to the pub and have a benign, non-engaging experience.
Do you think then that you find that not perhaps per se in your environment, but the people in your environment?
Well, I think obviously it's influenced by them. And there are plenty of occasions when you go to a pub or wherever, and there's just simply nobody there that you would wish to talk to, and that's obviously.
Well, shit happens, but
Yeah.
I mean, would you say that what really brings you into the moment is the feedback loop?
Yeah, probably. I think having a good audience. I'm more of a transmitter than an empath.
Which is good for this format, but
So having a good feedback loop, but having good, engaging conversation and ideas, whether that is in the work environment or, socially or whatever.
So moving away to a different subject, I would say you're I'm very lucky because I know a lot of travelled people, but I would say among them you probably are around that mark of having seen vast swaths of the globe, and more importantly, vast swaths of people in the globe.
Yeah.
Rather than a holiday, you see what I mean?
Oh yeah,
Community
absolutely.
interaction.
Yep.
So this is a threefold question. Where's somewhere that you wish you could return to? Where's somewhere that you never ever fucking want to go to again? And
Yeah.
where's somewhere that you would want to bring people you care about?
Right. So the first answer and the last answer might be the same. My favourite of all countries was Malaysia. I was very fortunate. We had 30-day break between operations. I was on a global deployment back in 1990, and we visited Samboang in Malaysia and then Singapore. And during that transition, the ship was going out to do some operations with the Australians, and they left us, the officers under training, ashore to do this project whereby we had, without public transport, to get ourselves, and very little money, from coastal Malaysia across the border into Singapore, and then meet the ship in Singapore. And we had 16 days to do it. And it was a joyous experience. It was fantastic. We basically cheated.
Sounds like the premise for a TV
Oh,
show.
we just cheated.
Yeah.
We took all public transport. I mean, who's going to know?
Right.
I think probably the first lesson you learn is read the rules and then work out who's going to enforce the rules.
And how you can get around the rules.
And once you realise the rules are unenforceable, break the rules. So, and I think if there was a good lesson to be learned out of any of that, it was that. So we ended up going to Kuala Lumpur, into the jungle, and then down towards beaches, and ate just. I mean, it was a brilliant trip in a country that was progressive, coming into the world fast. I mean, Kuala Lumpur, even then, was an extraordinarily good city, but still had vast swathes of of land, which might veered from mountains to primary jungle to crystalline white sands, and it's just idyllic. And so that was brilliant, and I would love to go back and not necessarily repeat the experience. I think I would be happy to pay for travel. But it would be a great country to go back and visit. It is a beautiful country. I think, similarly, my experience of Thailand would mirror. I mean,
It's more recent as
yeah,
well.
much more mirror. But I found the place just beautiful and exhilarating and interesting and calm and meditative and fun and smiley and happy, and it was just lovely. And it's the kind of place, frankly, if I were going to do one big mass family holiday, I would find a place somewhere down southern Thailand and do that. The middle one, where would we not want to go back again? God, so many places. I think my most frightening experiences were in Sierra Leone, where obviously being under house arrest during a fairly bloody coup wasn't particularly attractive. I think from environmental perspective, probably Murmansk and Archangel in what was then still Soviet Russia, up in the Arctic Circle. I mean, not a comfortable place to be, both environmentally, in terms of the state of their respective cities, and of course at the time the politics, because we were there the week that Gorbachev, who was the then president, was being held captive in a dacha in Georgia, and Boris Yeltsin was poised to take over. So, it was a febrile environment in a very grim and austere place, which, as you might suppose, if you could picture, even in a sort of comic book fashion, what grim, decaying, concrete cities in the northern Siberian wastes would look like, it was worse than that.
And that's a pretty viscerally horrible image.
And then similarly, where else? God, there's so many. I would love to have shared sitting in camp in Guyana under the stars. There's a reason why the European Space Agency is based in that corner of South America.
Which you would never think.
No, it is. They're in French Guyana, which is literally over the border from Guyana. And Guyana is a British dependency. It's a vast country. And I led a group who we went and built a school, a plumbing supply. God, bizarrely, I'm on camera teaching women about contraception and men about condoms.
Sorry, the laughable thing there was the idea of him on camera doing anything.
Oh no, we took a BBC
You bumble
doc.
though. You bumble, which is you'd never be good for the camera.
I bumble.
You're too big. See, this is the thing.
Yeah, but I was a slight racing snake back in the day.
No, but it's the tallness effect. Do you see what I mean? In
No,
the same
not at
way
all.
that Chewbacca looks fucking enormous. It's because Hollywood is a very short place.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Stephen Merchant, right?
Yes, but we were literally in a place where the skies are more massive than anywhere else you've ever seen in the
What
world.
was that like though, with no light pollution?
It's just an astonishing thing. You can see with utter clarity absolutely everything that is seeable. And that is remarkable because most people are unaware of how little they actually get to see, how little it is possible to see.
If you have.
But when you see the majesty of what you can actually see in the right environment, in the right place, at the right time. Bear in mind, I grew up in the Hebrides and we did have clear days every now and again. That was a big sky. This, however, was astonishing. And I would love to share that with anybody who, frankly, would come and take the time to do so. It's just an extraordinary place, extraordinary view, and stays with you forever. But yeah, on the whole, I've done quite well. There's been some toilets though.
Just to expand on that in two different ways. The first question to lead from that would be, do you think, doubling back on the conversation earlier, do you think that having experienced those hyper visceral moments of just natural wonder, right?
Yeah.
And actually, as the next question will detail, if you're good with it, also the very opposite end of not so viscerally beautiful, so much as viscerally terrifying.
Oh yeah.
Do you think that's perhaps then what gives you that elusive presence?
Possibly. I think it's interesting. I think the nice stuff has less impact and a longer tail than the nasties. The nasties have a really significant impact on your life and how you view things, and being in a war and recovering dead people and seeing people being shot and participating in that sort of thing nobody gets away without some form of scarring from that, and the scarring is immediate, deep, and long lasting. Whereas I think the benign, pleasant, pleasing things are obviously less impactful, far less shattering of the karma, but much more, it's more layered, benign, gentle influences accumulated over time. I think, does that give you presence? I think if you can handle shit, that gives you help. You know, at the end of the day, I don't get bothered by anything. I can't remember the last time I thought, I'm actually shit myself. I have no idea what to do in this situation. I can't actually remember when that was. Probably as a child, or conceivably as an adult, but not very bloody often.
But that's an abnormal thing, because I think a lot of people experience that pretty daily, right? On the minutiae of fucking buying like a bag of crisps, say you drop it at the counter, you immediately see someone get flustered. And it's interesting because the only other parallel that I could draw to that, what you're describing there, that unshakable perspective, would be getting on stage. And even then, there's a massive tremor in that experience. But I would say...
Oh, I've been nervous.
No, but I don't think that's what I mean.
I can't remember experiencing many instances of self-doubt.
That's what I mean, though, that imposter syndrome. I mean, honestly, I think in my own life, I could say that, especially when you're writing, you feel that you get that every fucking 5 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is this any good? Is this worth anything? Etc. Etc.
But that's a value judgment.
Yeah, but I mean, that value judgment then extends to the self-doubt of, if this is worth nothing, is this worth doing? Do you see what I mean? And it's a lot of people, I think, see that and instead opt to withdraw out of fear. And I would say that perhaps then it's a lack of self-seriousness.
Well, no, I would say, if you take your analogy there, the issue is not can I write. Patently, you can write.
Anyone can write.
Okay, anyone can write. Secondly, is this going to reach an audience? Is it relevant at this stage?
That's not
the
what
thing
I mean.
is, no, but the question you should be asking, the one that I think would be afflicted by self-doubt is, should I write?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. But that you didn't mention that. So that's
sorry.
That's
what I meant.
That's the point I was trying to get at. I think, everybody in the moment can be. I mean, I produce bits of work that sometimes I think, Christ, I'm never going to get away with that. But that's a value judgment. The judgment on whether you should be doing it in the first place is where the true essence of self-doubt or self-assurance would probably be more, keenly felt. And I think I don't really ever have those moments. I can't recall having those moments. I can recall being crap. I can recall being in situations where, frankly, I shouldn't have been there. But I wouldn't have been the person to not put myself in there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I think you have a unique perspective, because this is another topic, and I always run the risk of these episodes with having the same conversation over and over again.
Yeah.
But my retort to that would be, well, you can never have the same conversation. Because you're doing it with vastly different people.
And also, if you had the same conversation with me tomorrow, you'd have a different conversation.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
But a question, I like to ask some common questions, because I think it's what gives me the most insight. So, violence in Hollywood, right? There is a very basest, it's everywhere. It plays on that base adrenaline surge. Do you know what I mean? But how does that react with you, who's actually been in those environments?
I think.
Is there a flippancy?
No, it's. I think the only times I've really. 99.9% of all my experiences of watching anything on television is that I am very, very comfortable with divorcing myself
from
whatever reality they're trying to portray. I mean, whether it's a hyperreal or it's an actual real situation, etc. There are occasional moments where I actually am quite moved by the violence, and I suppose troubled wouldn't be the right way to say it. It creates a frisson which I don't normally perceive, and things that would be.
You're going to have
real.
to divulge.
Logan would be one
Yeah.
such. I found the violence in Logan disquieting and discomforting, principally because you got the problem of a young girl,
A child doing the
exactly,
slashing, yeah.
and the extreme competence with which she did what she did, and the absolute lack of
remorse.
well, remorse, yes, possibly, but immediate, instant response. Because at the end of the day, almost everybody does something violent and has an immediate response to it. Whether that is immediate in the moment or immediately thereafter, there is an immediate response to it. And I think that's never portrayed terribly well in film. There's the only time you ever see anything like that is when this notion that you can get incredibly horny having killed people. Thank God not, because otherwise on a ship of men it would get a little bit uncomfortable. But
Wasn't expecting that direction, but then if I was expecting anything, what would I do at all? Good. Well, I'm glad that you offered that insight, because it is a populist thing,
yeah,
Put some punches and kicks in.
it's interesting. Just yesterday, I think it was, a group of clinical child psychologists, after conducting the biggest study of its type ever undertaken, have determined that there is literally nothing in any game that any child has ever played that would incite behaviours that would be troubling, and it has the same benignity as television.
So, for the more history nuts, right, that I've been getting on, because there's been a few history nuts.
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
Question that we go with is, when and where would you like to go?
Ooh, there's a good question. Why do I have to go backwards?
Oh, when, yeah, what? Whoa, that's a zag. Expand.
Well, I would love, obviously, to have a few insights into where we've been in the past. But really, I'm much more intrigued about where we're going to. So, if I was restricted to going backwards, where the hell would I go?
No. Where forwards? Or
Oh,
how
I
far
think
forwards?
I would literally go.
Heat death of the universe, or 20 years?
No, I think I would probably go. I'd probably go in 10-year increments and spend probably 15 minutes gauging has anything significant happened? Is anything significant happening? And then if not, leap forward and do that until something really quite dramatic's happening. And then either get out of Dodge or be the witness to it. Going backwards, the problem I think with going backwards is I would like to probably witness things that have never been described to me.
Yes.
And I wouldn't take much succor from being at the Last Supper. I wouldn't particularly wish to be at the charge of the Light Brigade or anything like that. These things have their own currency, and everybody has their own sense of what that might have been like. So for me, and it's very difficult to define what this is because I'm literally trying to describe the unknown, is I would like to understand what the world looked like in between the ice ages. I would like to.
I'm more naturalistic than I thought you were going to go.
Well, events to avoid events, and that's all great. But the good thing about a good book is that
you can get those.
But you can, and the reality is, I'm no great historian. I haven't got the patience or the attention to detail to really drill down to what actually acutely matters in those situations.
So you'd rather see the shapes.
So that's what yeah, exactly. Which is why the leap forwards, until something really truly interesting is happening. Like for instance, would it be more important for me to see the first intergalactic space flight? Or would it be more important? No, would it be more important to be on a flight when they've nailed it?
Oh, okay.
Do you see? And I'd rather be on the one when they've nailed it. Yeah, because
you wouldn't feel the massive momentous.
Yeah, maybe it's kind of like, what would you rather do?
Yeah.
Be on the first. Be there to witness the first flight to the moon, Yuri Gagarin, all that sort of stuff, or go to the moon when they've really cracked it and it's actually a very, very good visceral experience to do. Personally, the latter.
Well, when you posit like that, I would say the latter. I think it's interesting because when people see that in their regular lives, though, and those moments, that's really uninteresting and boring, right? Why the fuck why would I not want to see the dawn of the internet when I use it every day? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's the point. I think, the superfluidity of all of this is based through, hyper-awareness, over-learning, etc. But what I'm saying is, I would want to go to a point where everybody else has that, and I don't.
Oh, okay. So more of a Back to the Future.
Kind of, if I could leap forward to the point where intergalactic space travel, was absolutely the norm. They all know it, but I would be. Oh.
Nobody's transcended the question yet, though, because my own personal answer to the question would be I would leave Earth and I would explore the cosmos. You know what I mean?
Well, that's kind of what I was talking about.
But I'm saying with the when and where, I mean, what is a supernova? Well, obviously you can't really look at a supernova with human eyes, but what would sitting on one of the rings of Saturn?
No, I'd say no. What? No. What? Sitting on one of the rings of Saturn? Go and find the first species of sentient life somewhere. That would be the thing. Either be the first person or go when actually lines of communication and trade are there, so you can actually. But bear in mind, we're coming from our time. So if we're coming from our time, you being there for the event, the momentous event is great, but being there afterwards when it's all understood and super known, when your infantile sort of prehistoric brain isn't amongst theirs. That's when it would be easiest to understand, rather than trying to understand what is actually blossoming in front of you. It's kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, obviously this is all vastly hypothetical, but I think it's an interesting opinion to take. What's something that you've learned as a pet? Because the only other parent I've had.
Parent? I thought you said as a pet.
What's something you've learned as a pet?
As a parent?
Yeah, what's something you learned as a parent that you didn't know as a kid? And then the extension of that question is, what would you tell yourself 20 years ago, that little pearl?
Okay, first things first, I think the single most important thing you can impart upon your kids is the confidence to communicate freely, fluently, and coherently with anybody. I think, all the other mechanics are really important, and obviously, safe haven, benignity of circumstance, good education, etc. But inevitably, everybody's primary interaction is going to begin or include verbal or written communication. And that ability to communicate, that's the one thing that has stood me in the greatest stead throughout my entire life, was the ability to communicate freely, confidently, and absolutely with anybody and everybody I met, irrespective of, whether they were soaring with the eagles or pecking with the chickens. It doesn't matter. I think that is the thing that I'm most proud of, because I think amongst the three of you, you have exemplary communication skills and are charming and conscientious and caring and careful and engaging people in any societal engagement that you might find yourself in. That I'm really proud of. What would I tell myself 20 years ago? Be there more, much more. You don't get it back. Be in the moment, be at the games, be at the school gates. It's quite fleeting. We were talking about this, Sarah and I, earlier on, and that is, because obviously, you have so many more responsibilities and things. One of the oddest means by which you can measure time is the fact that our bins get cleaned every 4 weeks. I know that sounds preposterous, but the truth of the matter is, it's not something that is on a calendar, and it's not something you recognise as being, it's bin cleaning day, but it seems to happen so damned quickly.
Right.
With a rapidity
it's the bins again. Because
you're not aware of, obviously, the passage of time between bin cleaning, but it just seems to happen. So the episodes are coming really, really fast. And that's alarming, because there's 4 weeks between episodes. I know this sounds
Which feels like it should be a long time.
It feels like it should, You know, not that you're aware of it, but it should grind. And then obviously that's because nobody ever looked forward again. You've been bins cleaned, and nobody ever set any meaningful time frame on
Today's
the
the
basis.
day.
Yeah, and therefore it doesn't sit in your conscious mind very often. But it is instructive
Of how quickly the
of
passage
how
can
quick,
go.
yeah, and how episodic lives are. And life isn't. If you're not in those episodes, they're gone. And you don't have that frame of reference, you don't have those memories, you don't have those connections, you don't have those shared experiences, or enough of them, is what I'm saying, really. So
Yeah.
if I could say something to my 20-year younger self, I'd
Be there more.
Be there a lot more.
I forget how old you are, because originally the question was...
But in fairness, Angus was born 21 years ago.
That's what I mean, though. I'm saying, like, obviously, with you being 50, 20 years ago is 30, I was...
Yeah, all right, don't rub it in.
Whoa. But with everyone else, that question's either you're 0 or you're 20. That's good advice, and I'm glad we... I would discuss the relativity of time with you, but we, ironically, don't have the time.
I don't want to talk about relativity of time. I struggle with that whole concept.
Well, then we won't talk about it.
No, that's fair enough. I just give myself, I'd rather talk about basket of. I was going to say a bag of kittens. What does that say about me?
Yeah, a little bit. Quick fire round. Quick fire questions. What record are the Dolphins going to have next year?
Good God, there's 17 games, aren't there? So I think 11-6.
Fucking hell, that's confident. All right, fair enough. Oh, okay.
Well, it's up from 10-6.
Yeah, it's still playoff berth, though.
Yeah, not in that league.
Yeah, maybe not now. What is something that everybody should own that you have? It's just like, this thing is the best. From a really materialistic perspective.
Oh, right. The thing. Well, personally, I think the thing that everybody should possess, and I know is constantly absent from you, is a good watch. So you can be
prudent and timeful.
Yes. What I think the best, I have to say, there is no doubt the thing that has revolutionized every life, and certainly mine, is the smartphone. So, I can't think of anything that has taken over so many of my little chores and interest points. I don't have to carry out 15 newspapers of a Sunday afternoon.
I don't even want to think about that prehistoric time.
Just think of the fire hazard.
Are there any lasting notes or any questions that you'd like to ask me?
Lasting notes? I don't think there are. Questions to ask you? No, not really. I just want to wish you the very best of this. I think it's
Thank you very much.
It's a good, fun project. I think you've
It is a
probably
fun
had...
project. Yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Great pleasure, Hamish.
It's been fantastic to have you. And on that note, we will pause the recording.